Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the NML Pickleball Podcast. I am Chris Ross. I'm here with Jeremy Comazzetto. Jer, what's going on?
Oh, not too much, Chris. Just living the dream, coming off another MLP weekend.
Coming off another MLP weekend. There was a ton that went on, as always. I think Ben said recently that, and we know this, that there's too much content to consume over the course of 4 days. It is a problem that so many of the matches go unseen. I think right now it seems like it might be rectified going into next year, but it is just like too much to view in one weekend.
Yeah, I think when we are saying it's too much, and we have always a tough time keeping on top of everything during an MLP weekend, it's probably too much.
Well, we have to start with, I think the story of the weekend has to be DC and Orlando repeating, right?
Oh yeah, those two, but we got a different result in the final. But
yeah, repeating, going back-to-back finals together, and then we had a reverse. DC ended up winning this time. They won 3-0. They took the gender doubles matchups. They matched up Andre and Anna with Riley and Jade, which I think was actually questionable strategy, but it ended up working for them, and they won. So, do you have a big takeaway from that final or that victory by DC?
I just think DC is the best team in Premier this season, and I actually think they are by a pretty decent margin. I know they lost in event 1 to Orlando, but I think DC will be favored again pretty heavily in event 3 and the super final. So I just think that they're the one team in Premier that doesn't really have an obvious weakness. They put out 2 strong gender teams and 2 strong mixed teams. Obviously, I think Kawamoto's continuing to go underrated, really set that team up. And then they hit on Christian Elshon. I kind of like the Christian pick in that we knew he could play mixed and we knew he could play singles, which I think are what you really want with that second guy. But the big thing is he's been a really good men's doubles player too, and actually being a good partner with Riley. He gives Riley some finishing power, and he's pretty comfortable on that right side.
It's kind of funny that I think we'd put in just the live blog that Riley doesn't have finishing power, or he lacks despite a lack of finishing power, and people are surprised when they see or read that Riley doesn't have finishing power. But I think it's pretty apparent at this point, and more so than ever, that he really has trouble finishing the ball, and I think it's a big help to him that Christian is there with that big forehand and that big overhead to put some points away, because Riley couldn't put a point away in mixed against Andre and Anna in that final.
No, it's very apparent Riley doesn't have anywhere close to elite finishing power, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem for him. In men's, he definitely needs, at this point, a guy with elite finishing power as a partner, and I think it actually limits his mix ceiling now, and I think it's one of the reasons we haven't seen him have nearly the results in mix this year. He doesn't get a lot on that backhand in terms of power, and he can get that forehand down, but he has no power, as we know, on the forehand, and not definitely a low-end overhead in terms of a high-end player.
But what's the difference? Because he never had elite finishing power. He doesn't have a great overhead. But what's changed? I know he's not his gamma paddle wasn't anything special as a paddle.
No, I think it's just the players are getting better. Like the level is getting better.
Yeah, I mean, pickleball's just getting better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and you put Riley now with Christian. They're gonna play at nationals together this week. I'm gonna be really curious to see how that goes. And it's not a partnership where he's going in blind this time. He's got some experience with Christian. Christian still doesn't counter at a really good level, but he doesn't have to do as much when he's taking 45% of the court as opposed to 60% of the court or even 50% of the court.
Yeah, no, Christian's body is still quite vulnerable there. He can't counter in here, it seems like.
And what about Orlando? I'm like, this team, I think we thought that, and you thought better than me, that they had a very good draft, but they don't have anything that's amazing. And I'm not a big, MLP team greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing, but it kind of seems like Orlando is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, and I think like DC actually shows like at the end of the day, talent generally rises to the top. Like, Riley's never been considered Mr. Teammate. Kawamoto's aren't energy. Christian Alshon is Christian Alshon, but like they're just the best. They have the best talent in it. But Orlando has now probably 2 events in a row outperformed their on paper what you'd expect them to do. And I think it is a bit, chemistry. I also think they benefit from just having smart players that act like professionals. And I think that is an edge. Thayton Navitral, somebody probably gets close to the max out of his abilities and can figure some out. Andre is working very hard on his game. I think few players spend more time thinking and analyzing other players than Anna Bright. She's working hard. No less about Rachel, but she seems to be treating the game like it's the pro sport and working on her game. And I think just having 4 professionals that are actually kind of working on things and figuring stuff out is a huge benefit.
I can't help but think when I think you talk about the professionalism of the squeeze, that Anna doing her impression of Andre's coach and just being like, stay hot. They stayed hot. I think the other thing with the squeeze, like, I just didn't think that. Yeah, I just thought they played well, and I thought they had the ability that they were more of still like a middle of the pack, maybe upper middle of the pack team. But I think like we're seeing at a couple of events now that they just are better, and they have a solid Dreambreaker team, which definitely helps them out. But they don't have any weak spots. You hit on your 4th round pick. That's like the big thing, that you hit on your 4th round pick. If you hit on that, you're gonna win.
Yeah, I think having no weak spots, and I think just being able to put out 4 competitive teams is a huge thing, and being competitive in Dream Breakers. Like, I think if you have a team that probably is going to lose, over 65% of their matches, you're in trouble because the variance on your other ones are going to be the thing. And it's the same kind of with Dream Breakers. If you start having a player that's going to lose 65%-ish of their Dream Breaker points, you're in big trouble.
Are there any teams that have players that lose 65% plus of their Dream Breaker points potentially?
I don't know if you're taking a slice out of the slice, but maybe.
Yeah, it's the first team that's really been kind of cringy to watch in a Dream Breaker, because I think you get Mopey Ben out in a Dream Breaker with that team, and it's just like it was kind of sad to watch, because they won 1 Dream Breaker in the first event, and I just thought, man, you put 2 subpar Dream Breaker players out there, and it really gets exposed at a certain point. You might win 1 or 2 on a 10 maybe, but you're losing most of the time when everyone can at least play singles competently on another team.
Yeah, I think it's really hard when you have the weaknesses that you just can't hide. And I think there just becomes a point kind of in your variance that it really works against you.
Yeah, and I think the weak spot for the squeeze is their men's doubles team. Zane and Andre isn't the best men's doubles team, but they're competent enough that they're going to win matches. They won against Ben and Eric. I mean, Ben and Eric didn't win all weekend pretty much, but you're winning against a team like that. It makes a real difference that you can pull out some of those wins, and you're not just conceding one of your matches onto the 4.
Yeah, I think it just puts too much pressure on your other matches if you are conceding one.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I wanted to mention about the the repeat champions, and we also saw it with the Hard Eights, they repeated, is just now we've got a whole bunch of MLP teams, or sorry, a whole bunch of MLP events at this point. We've got 8 MLP events to work from. And starting from 2022, you had BLQK, Ranchers, BLQK, and then you had Mad Drops, Pioneers, Mad Drops from the Super Final. And you have Bay Area, Chicago Slice, getting the final, and Dallas. And now you have back-to-back events with the Squeeze and DC, and you have the Hard Eights winning. Like it kind of seems like the best teams just win. It's not that volatile over the course of a number of events at MLP. If you take one event, the best team might not win, but the best team's going to get onto the group stage. The best team is probably going to make a semifinal. They just might not win. I think it's just like MLP maybe less volatile, and the margins may not actually be as small as they seem from a game-to-game, match-to-match basis.
Yeah, you raised that yesterday with me, and I think it's a good point, something I hadn't really thought too much about, but it does seem that generally the best teams win or they get right there. So we love to talk about the unpredictability of MLP, but it actually seems like more often than not, it's pretty predictable. Actually, on that note, shout out to Frisco, who up to this point in 2 seasons had been winless, and then they went on a run to the finals. So, and I actually did not see, I thought Frisco was probably going to get at least a win or two. I think we talked about that on the last podcast, but I actually did not see the finals run coming for them. So.
Well, I definitely thought Frisco was better than their 0-3 performance after going back and watching their matches. They played a couple of dream breakers. But I think this goes to what I think my sense is, without any real data and just looking at teams who have how they have done. But basically, if your team's not terrible, so you're not, the Atlanta Bouncers from this year, or you're not the Florida Smash and Challenger, you have a chance to make a big run as much as anyone. We saw that with the Hustlers in the first event of season 1. The BLQK, I think they made the playoffs a couple times, but they had a finals run. So you have these teams make these big runs. Even the Hard Eights at the final event of 2022 made a big run. But basically, if you have better teams or worse teams, the top and bottom, it's going to be like there's not going to be a bad event for the really good teams, and there's not going to be a good event for the really bad teams, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's kind of almost like you're running March Madness a few times. You often aren't going to have the best team win, but a lot of your better teams are going to get deep in the finals, and you can have a Cinderella type run, right? Or it's kind of like the World Cup or something. You're not always going to get the best winner, but generally your better teams are going to advance. World Cup, actually soccer might be a better example. You kind of have the pool play and then your playoff bracket. So you're not always going to have your best team win, but generally your better teams are going to go further, but you can have the occasional Cinderella run.
Well, I think what's a little surprising at this point is you don't need as much of a sample size as I would have thought you would need to see who the best teams are. In baseball, the baseball playoffs are always kind of silly. You play 162 games, and then you have these really short playoff series, where baseball, you need at least half a season, sometimes more, to really determine who's a good player, who's the best team. But in pickleball, you need more of a sample size in one MLP event, and of course more than one game within one match within an event. But you don't need so much of a sample size. It's like if you get a playoff series, like a 7-game series, I think the better team is going to come out on top, probably in a similar percentage to basketball that we're seeing. But if you have two teams that are close, like in basketball, 4-5 seed, 3-6 seed, anyone can sort of come out on top in those situations. But your 1 versus 8, it's not going to be or a 1 versus 5 situation even. I think it's you're going to have that team come out probably a similar amount as it does in basketball, I'm going to guess, without looking at any numbers.
Yeah, and I do think that's interesting because it seems like there should be, and there is maybe a little more variability in playing like one game to 21 versus a best 2 out of 3, 11 side out scoring. But I think maybe part of it too is that at the end of the day, it seems like these better teams don't have glaring weaknesses, and that's part of it. So even if they drop one of the games that you'd expect them to win, they often, because they're just better across the board, are able to make that up in the other games.
Yeah, I think you saw that with the hard eights this weekend. They had trouble. Their women haven't been quite as good, but then their men would lose a match, like in the Mad Drops in the semifinal. The men lost, the women won, and they win. Then they go ahead and win 3-1. So that if you can win in a bunch of different ways, kind of like Orlando can, it leaves less room for variance. So I don't think I would have thought this a year and a half ago when we were starting MLP that it would. And maybe it isn't this clear, but it seems like it's fairly clear once you figure out who the better teams are, that they're, we're going to have 40 matches next year for each team according to the new schedule. So that's a lot of that's a big sample size compared to across 3 events. You might get 15 matches if you're a really good team.
Yeah, that's a lot of sample size. I think the other thing that maybe could change it is I still think we have a pretty big disparity in kind of some of these teams in the drafting and stuff. So we see the better teams, but there's also bottom. Maybe if we got a little more in that.
What do you mean?
What I mean is, I think if you have a few less heirs in drafting, the disparity becomes a little between your I think this DC is substantially better than the number 2 team this year, in whether that be Orlando, which it probably is, in Premier. If that gap isn't as wide, is it as clear if the 1 through 6 team, we're talking this margin versus this margin, I think it becomes a lot less clear who your best team could be.
I don't think the podcast listeners can see your hand signaling margins.
Well, I'm saying whether we're small versus larger, but I just think we've seen some gap. I think Chicago, and you look in season 1, not Chicago, Seattle, with Ben, but Ben had Etta, Megan Dizon, and Tyler Loon. Other than the Tyler Loon, Megan Dizon mixing, they didn't really have a weakness, but Megan and Etta falling to where they did really stack that team, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I don't even think the Megan and Tyler partnership was quite as weak as their record indicated, because they were always up 2-0, so they just throw them out against the crummier mix. They'd always get the matchup against the crummier mixed team, or often when they win the toss.
Or you mean the Megan and Tyler would play the better mixed team?
Yeah, that's what I mean. But
yeah, I just think we haven't and you look at the year before, we talk about BLQK, getting Paris Todd at, what was that?
No, they got her in whatever, the late set, 19th or 20th overall, when it was just women, I think. So
yeah, so I just think we don't maybe have a huge sample size of what it looks like. And you look at Bay Area, and this is always going to be the thing. There's always going to be advantages in sports, right? Somebody's going to find that late round steal. But I think we've had some teams set up, you were talking about the Bay Area Breakers, and until they lost Rachel, but they were able to get Christian and Pablo, 2 of the only guys to move up to Premier,
and Hunter.
And 2 of the 3 guys that moved to Premier, and Eva, who was probably the most dominant woman in season 1 of Challenger, at least until Jill Braverman came along, they got lucky. I just think that if we maybe have a little bit more equality on drafting, and that's something you can look at maybe also next year if they are doing 24 teams. Maybe you can create a super team, and I'll be curious. I think they're going to see some good teams and some bad teams, but I think we're going to see some really bad teams next year, by the way, if you're doing 24 teams.
Yeah, I guess I think that in all pro sports, like you'd think at the highest levels of pro sports, which is not where pro pickleball is, you'd have competent front offices all the time. And sometimes you can be competent and just make bad picks, but sometimes you're just incompetent, or you just don't understand how to run a good team. So I think that's always going to happen. So I don't know if your margins are going to shrink that much. They should shrink some as more people get, the teams actually have more infrastructure with teams. But I think it's an open question whether, you will have teams that are this dominant. And so much has to do right now with your draft position. Like the top teams in Premier are mostly the top picks as well. And I think that makes a big difference at Premier.
For sure. Right now in Premier, that seems to be a huge advantage.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about this weekend. I think a place where, the big question for me is like this slice are just so interesting. I don't know if there's a big question, but they basically they are who we thought they were. They are a very mediocre team that is buoyed by a really good player who looked a little mopey. He looked like Backdrop Benny this weekend.
Yeah, I actually think Chicago's a little worse than I thought they were. And I don't know if that's just Ben being mopey, but I think she actually did, she dinked some girls to death this weekend in women's. But Jessie Irvine struggled somewhat in mixed, and I'm not sure if that's the
I think she only lost the last match. Only lost the last game she played.
I thought they lost 2 this weekend. Didn't Eric and Leigh have to win another one to send them to a dream breaker earlier in the weekend?
Yeah, but I think that's because both gender matchups lost, because Eric and Ben went 1-4 this weekend. But I think Jessie, she beat Glosman and Tyra in women's, because she just dinked the crap out of them basically. And then I think the last match, because I think in her quarterfinal after that, did they make the semis?
They made the semis. They lost the 3 straight in the semis.
Because in the quarters, they interviewed Jessie, said we haven't lost a mixed match together yet. So
okay, maybe I was wrong. I thought they'd lost one. It's so hard to tell with Ben how much of it is because he didn't look fully engaged this weekend. But if anything, slightly worse. I think we knew that they had these dream breaker issues, and those have come to fruition. But Ben hasn't been 100% Ben, which I guess obviously they had to kind of luck their way into actually making the quarters, but he's an unengaged Ben, still made the semifinals. So
yeah, I saw they showed him on video before the quarterfinal match on the broadcast. They showed him playing lefty games with some people. I think we heard he was playing side bets, playing games and having side bets on those games and playing pretty hard in those at the court. So I think it matters that he's not engaged when he goes 1-4 in men's. It doesn't look like he's not trying. It just looked like, other than the semifinal, he's maybe 5 to 10% less than he normally is, which is enough in those games to 21 not to be good enough. I don't know. I wonder for these people, especially with all that's going on, because a lot of people out there look like they cared this weekend. I think that was a big advantage for the Squeeze and DC as well. It's just not only being better, but they have a bunch of people that cared about winning, whereas some teams, I think, may not have had people that are that motivated to win when there's nothing.
Who didn't you think was motivated to win?
Pardon?
Who didn't you think was motivated to win?
Benny Backdraw wasn't motivated to win. I think Julian Arnold might not have been super motivated to win.
Well, why is Julian Arnold going to be motivated over a few $1,000? Guy's got a nice Mercedes.
He's not
living
going to be.
large.
Well, this is the problem. He's got lots of money
Wants
coming.
his private chef and private masseuse.
I don't know if he actually has those.
No, but he wants them. You know, he needs them. He's a star.
He is a star now. Get that camera out of his face.
Can we talk for a second about like these pickleball players like suddenly get a little bit of money and a little bit of notoriety, and that some of them basically consider themselves like superstars, I guess you could say?
I don't think it's a good thing. I think as well, there may need to be some realization that, you know, a couple $1 million over 3 years isn't going to set you up for the rest of your life. You know, maybe winning $25,000 at another MLP event, that money, you got to save some for the bank at some point. And I don't know how you suddenly, and I don't think this is happening with all players, but I'm curious, like, what's motivation going to be like for players when, like, the big thing about MLP is what they did at the beginning is they put all this prize money on the table that players did not have at other events. Now they're going to be paid. I don't know what the prize money looks like what their incentive is next year. Right now, they still should have some incentive. It's still money that they don't have. But I think you start looking and you start seeing, oh, I'm going to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't need this anymore.
Well, but that's almost all pro sports, right? These days, like most sports have guaranteed contracts, like NBA, Major League Baseball, like they're fully guaranteed. A lot of these guys have made set for money, like, and it comes down to, I think, two things: pride and that next contract. These players are only 3-year contracts, so a lot of them should be wanting to perform for the future. And we will see, you know, there's always that player that gets that guaranteed deal, especially say NBA or those MLB players sometimes that get it and they just fall off a cliff. So it's obviously a risk, but it's there in all pro sports. Like even in pro sports where, you know, you do get payouts like tennis and golf and things, a lot of players that really make it, they get with endorsements and stuff enough money that it does come down to individual motivation to want to be the best. So you're going to get a few that kind of weed themselves out if they don't have that inner drive, right? So obviously that's new for pickleball. I think there's a lot of people that actually probably in pro pickleball don't have great inner drive, and that's kind of how they ended up in pro pickleball. But you'll see the cream rise to the top and the rest will kind of float away. And that's, I guess, one thing that could be interesting with it is with the PPA and MLP kind of coexisting, could some players see MLP as their way to grow their personal brand and kind of focus on that and not maybe perform for their MLP teams, which could be further infuriating to MLP owners than if you have a guy on your team that just isn't performing, that he's losing out. But you could, in this format, kind of somebody showing out in PPAs and raising basically their value while not performing for you.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be something that is going to have to be, you got to know the players. You got to know what people are doing these days. I think I think, to be fair, I saw more often than not, I think this weekend, people like still really cared about winning. People were jacked up about winning for the most part. And I'm not even saying like Julian wasn't jacked up, but I think it's just who's more devastated by losing and who's not happy about losing. I think that's sort of the difference here is that, you know, look.
I would expect generally these people are athletes. They are going to be competitors, or I'd hope they are, right? So.
Well, and I think about, you know, even motivation questions going into this season. Columbus made the playoffs. They had Megan Fudge in there for Maggie Brasha. It was really big for them to make the playoffs. Megan somehow won a mixed match with Colin Johns, which is like a miraculous feat for Megan, I think. And but I was thinking this weekend that you pick Colin Johns. Not only is Colin Johns just like not a great pick, or not a good pick at all. But is Colin Johns also going to be motivated to help JW Johnson get better to beat him? I thought that's another wrinkle about the whole JW like not picking Gabe is you pick Colin. He's not going to give JW the tips on how to be better. He doesn't care.
I haven't really thought about that. That's a good point.
It was another thing, and I didn't think of this at the time of the draft, but I was thinking about it because I was listening to Colin Johns, and he's really smart on these podcasts, but he's also very smart that he's not going to let the secrets out for his competition to beat him. So there's more than just, your external motivation of being good as well that has to be taken into consideration in these things. There's personal relationships, there's competition. I think I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out next year, though.
For sure. No, I'll be curious to see. I think you're going to see it go both ways. I think a lot of players are going to be more motivated than ever, knowing that there's money out there and they have the ability to do this as a living. So I think you're going to see a lot of people actually care more than ever and hone their craft more than ever. But you're definitely going to see a few people also, I think, go the other way. They've been paid and they're done.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't have that much to add there. Other teams that is there anything other teams you want to talk about, or who you were right, who you were surprised that you were wrong about?
I don't know, actually. You seem to have somebody.
I have a couple. Well, I think I have one right, which is funny because of how cocky Mr. Pardo was after the draft, and Utah. We were in the pretty large minority of people who didn't think Utah had that great a draft at all.
And they in particular really didn't. I was in between on their draft. I didn't love it, but I don't know if I hated it. I think you were all the way out, and that was probably the correct take.
Yeah, I think we amend our grades before, like we go together on them, but I think I had a lower one than what we got put out. But it's again another tournament where Anna Leigh doesn't make the playoffs. Ben has never missed the playoffs. Irina is Irina. She's the queen of MLP. It's nice to finally see that never made any sense, and it now makes more sense because she's not winning with pretty good partners by her side. I think she played with Thomas Wilson for 2 of the 3 matches, and Thomas Wilson didn't have a great tournament. I think a little exposed maybe as a number 1 guy. I don't know why he's not playing as well, but I just, it's, I don't know. Fed gave a take that B to Anna Leigh. I don't think that is anything I condone, but I think people are also extra motivated to beat Anna Leigh at MLP events. I think that
I want to be careful there. That sounds like it's close to a condoning saying something to a 16-year-old girl. So I don't think that was. I think that was very out of line from Mr.
Oh, I'm not saying I agree with it at all. I'm just saying how people I think feel about. I think it was bad of Fed to say that. Let's be clear. I said it was bad when we talked about it this weekend.
Yeah, I just think I think we want to be careful there.
Okay, well, let's be clear that it was bad. You can't say that. You can't say that to any female on the court, much less a 16-year-old. I don't care this all pro stuff. You can't say that. It's just not. And he knew it. He apologized. It was dumb. But I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, just you're talking about like this Utah team and not really kind of playing maybe as well as you'd expect. Do you think anything might have to do with like Irina and Anna Leigh usually have paddle techs that sound very poppy but suddenly don't sound poppy? We know a lot of paddles were failing this weekend, and we know at times Thomas this year has been playing, I think not of late, but with an extremely delaminated paddle. Like, you're talking about 3 of your 4 players on your team have, I think at times this year, had significant paddle advantages.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that Anna Leigh had a bunch of paddles fail this weekend in Dallas, and we also heard that Irina, she did her PPA paddle that was challenged by old Jilly B there. She actually didn't yield that paddle. She refused to yield that paddle for testing, which is always the sign of someone who has nothing to hide. And yeah, it's I think it's a real thing potentially that you have 3 people who may have had paddle advantages before that now with MLP having better testing in place, they're not doing anything like in terms of consequences, but it may be a real thing that has to be considered at least as a reason for them not doing as well, which Mr. Pardo should have known better than anyone that was a possibility.
Yeah, and I just actually think it's interesting. I think at some point we do have to look further at Anna Leigh's results. Obviously, she doesn't have the same partners, but she is absolutely dominant on the PPA and women's doubles. And like, suddenly she's taking losses regularly with maybe not her selected partners, but partners that I think if we saw her go out and play with on the PPA, we'd be expecting her to still win. Like, we just see her win.
Yeah, and I can't say I take this into account when I thought they weren't drafted as well as a lot of other people did. So I don't know what else there is to say. It's a weird thing, but there might actually be a pretty straightforward explanation to it.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it's probably a poorly constructed team. Like, I didn't love the Irina pick. AJ Kohler has had a very rough year, I would say, especially in MLPs. He's inconsistent. And Thomas Wilson, I actually saw it was like the one guy that might kind of save that team, and he hasn't performed great so far.
Yeah, and Thomas may be best on the right side, not as an alpha, as a number 2 mixed guy, and he might be better just on the right and more under control and not having to cover so much court, use that big forehand.
In men's doubles, I don't think it's actually close that he profiles way better as a right side player. It cuts down on his errors when he's taking less court. He's under control, and that forehand is an absolute weapon there. So it makes him tough.
Okay, 2 teams that we were wrong about. Brooklyn Aces made the semifinals, and they had actually they were sort of overmatched actually by DC. Really good matches though, some really good points. And then Dallas, they did not make it out of pool play again. We picked them to get out of pool play. Callie, Jay, Elise, James Ignatowicz. It didn't pan out again, I think. So wrong on both teams. I think, I kind of chalk up the Brooklyn to like this is their one event. I don't know if I see them going and doing it again. I think Catherine won with Tyler. I think that's a big thing that they can create a really good mixed team on a like your 4th round pick. But I don't know if I see them doing it again. They Catherine and Andrea aren't anything special as a women's pairing. It looked like they got. They didn't win all their matches. And I think that if you're picking 2 women with your first 2 picks, like Utah did, and you're not winning basically all your matches, it's a problem.
Yeah, I'm, and this might be biased, and I'll eat my words if they do it again. I am waiting to see on Brooklyn. I do think Catherine and Andrea hasn't been playing great of late. I think that does still give you an upper MLP women's team. And yeah, being able to play your 4th round pick guy and get wins in mixed is a big advantage. So maybe are wrong, but I need to see it again. I don't think they do anything special. Dallas I think we're wrong about. I thought they were kind of middle of the pack. They may be bad. the James, it's interesting because I think that they maybe have a couple kind of legacy players that are falling. Like, I think Callie just isn't the same player, and probably Jay isn't. Jay is a problem in that number 2 guy's role, in that he really needs to play on the left and take more court in men's. He's not really comfortable, I think, playing the right and taking less court.
I think they did go 3-0 in men's, though, just to point out. And yeah, I think they went 3-0 in men's.
Yeah, and I think that again comes down to maybe it's really a Callie issue.
Yeah, I mean, Callie and Jay have played on the tour this year, and they just have had very middling results. I don't even think they've had one event where they've made a big run. I think that you just, I don't know, Elise may have overrated her as well, although James and her, they lost an important mixed match against Brooklyn, I believe, in their last match. That was the only match that I think James lost on the weekend, but that was a big match that they lost. They went 2-1. But Elise and Callie, they're going to play, it looks like they're going to play nationals together, might play some PBAs next year as well. I don't know what that team really gets you. It's like a poor person's version of Callie and Lucy, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, there's just too many safe places to go with the ball. We know you can flow play Callie's backhand. That was what we saw with Callie and Lucy over and over again. And then Elise is a good defensive player still, but she's not going to hurt you. So there's a lot of spots you can go. Basically, you stay away from Callie's forehand, and that team, I just don't think scares women's teams. Like, you can work up against them, you can move it around, dinking, like.
Yeah, there's just not enough juice on that team, probably. Then they very easily, I will say, like, again, these margins are slim from event to event, and they had a match point against, Jay and Callie had a match point against, I don't know did you see this, by the way, against Leigh and whoever, I think she was playing with AJ.
I didn't.
Yeah, so they had a match point against them this was in the second mixed match, and they had match point, and they're at the kitchen established. Callie goes to show an Ernie and crosses the plane by her foot crosses the plane, like very clearly crosses the plane, and foot fault, and they lose them. They ended up losing the game and the match. They lost the Dream Breaker then. So again, these margins are slim. We could be looking at Dallas a little bit differently, but I think that, again, as we talked about, the margins aren't quite as thin. If you're good, you're good. You don't need those tiny margins just to hope to get. You're like maybe a middling team at best, I think.
Yeah, and again, maybe also, like, I know something that was interesting, we got more as the weekend went on, but were there less Dream Breakers this weekend overall?
Yeah, I meant to go count them, and I didn't. I know there was literally one Dream Breaker in the first day Challenger out of all, I think, 18 matches. I don't know if there were less Dream Breakers overall this event. I think there must have.
Well, I just know, like, on the Sunday we didn't see any Dream Breakers. Like, it just felt like there was less. I think I need to go, actually. That's not a hard thing to add up, but
I think it had to have been just based on even the first day. I don't think we didn't see a plethora of Dream Breakers after the first day. So I have to think there were less overall this event.
Yeah, I just think also Dallas isn't, like, they're not an awful, but they're probably a below average Dream Breaker team. Like,
are they?
Well, how good is James at singles?
Right. Okay, James is theoretically a good singles player, but he, as your number one guy, he has shown there's actually a decent sample size of Dream Breakers that he hasn't done well. He got eaten up again in their Dream Breaker against Utah.
Yeah, I just see him get eaten up. I think they got two number 2 guys or 2 1A guys in the guy side. And I think Callie isn't really a number 1. And Elise at this point, she gets some singles wins, but she's a below average premier women's, like, singles player. I think they just lack the upper end singles players.
Yeah, probably true. Even if you're balanced, you don't have that like one that can do it for you and really count on them.
Yeah.
Speaking of dream breakers, by the way, that Brooklyn, the quarterfinals, the Brooklyn Columbus dream breaker, where Brooklyn threw Catherine out as the number 2, and then and she went against Colin Johns, and then Megan went against Tyler. It was a really fun dream breaker.
Yeah, I generally don't love the strategy, but it does often make for more entertaining at times dream breakers, getting to see guys versus girls.
Yeah, because Colin in singles, it's for whatever reason, it's kind of fun to see him play singles. But he was doing well. I think he had taken 6 of 8, and then he went 1 for 4 in the last round where he could have sealed the deal. But I mean, Columbus also shouldn't have even been in that dream breaker. That was a sad group with Columbus, Bay Area, Atlanta, and Bay Area had Susanna filling in for Etta Wright, and so you had Atlanta and DC. So it was a pretty sad group. And Columbus gets out of the group with Megan Fudge. And they then have Megan won both her matches and JW lost both his matches. They should have beaten Brooklyn. So it's another reason like Brooklyn shouldn't have been in the semifinal. Like really. They almost lost to Megan Fudge Columbus Sliders team.
Yeah. J-Dub continues, and I know maybe it's just circumstance, but he probably doesn't perform as well as you'd expect in MLPs. Like,
yeah, it's a problem. I think at this point, I still think Colin Johns is not an optimal partner for him, as I said before. But I think pretty notable.
Do you think it's too much energy?
I think he does have too much energy. He's like, it's like, like Rachel Rohrbacher's got a ton of energy. Shelby Bates has a ton of energy. And then I think J.W. Johnson is like a close third, I think.
Okay. I thought you were talking about Colin Johns there.
Okay. Well, Colin Johns is right behind him, but it's just an energy team. That's an energy squad.
Yeah.
So I think that one other thing that I think I'd be curious actually on Arizona didn't make the playoffs. So I just want to mention, I think I'd like to see Julian and Deckel play some PPAs together. I'd just be curious what that looks like.
What makes you like that? They've gotten some results.
They gotten some results. I think they lost. They lost. Like they beat Ben and Eric, which I don't know how much that was a feat.
Everybody did this weekend.
So I know, but so they had gone undefeated, and then they lost a couple. Or did they? They definitely lost to Orlando. I think they lost a couple of matches, or did they? Actually, I'm not sure. They definitely lost to Orlando.
I know they lost to the Squeeze guys.
Yeah, but anyway, I'd just be curious to see them. And also, I think just props to Susanna Barr as well, like the two fill-ins, Megan Fudge, Susanna Barr. Susanna had a pretty wild win against Atlanta, like Paris and Hunter, and then she won both her matches against the DC. Only person to beat the Kawamotos with Leah Jansen so far.
Yeah, no, some good wins, and it does maybe speak to something that you could maybe going to write about, but like maybe the margins between some of these players aren't as much as we think they are, like between some of the Premier and Challenger players.
Yeah, I think like I think it might not be like as big as some people might think it is. I think like you have just like we saw at the APPs last year, like in 2022, you have your top PPA players that are just like better. And here you have your, it's really top heavy, but then once you get outside the top, I don't know how big the difference is. Like, where does that line stop where those people can't compete? Some people, we don't see them play at the highest level. Like, how does CJ Klinger look in Premier? I just have no idea how he actually looks, but
that's two-time MVP CJ Klinger to you.
That is two-time MVP CJ Klinger. But that's what I mean. Like, I don't know what he would look like, but I think a lot of people might think he's just like, oh, he's challenger guy, these people. But even Brendan Long, he goes up and he played well. He played well last year or the last season for the Hustlers, and he's not even an alpha guy in in Challenger. He's not even a properly fit alpha guy, so I just, these guys, I think people can hang. I don't know if you can hang over the course of 40 matches in the way that you would need to, but to fill in for an event here and there, you can definitely play at your level or a little above your head and not look out of place, I think, between Challenger and Premier for a decent chunk of players who are at that Challenger level.
That's probably fair. I think there's kind of probably a cutoff around like probably 24-ish players. I'm just taking the arbitrary kind of top half of, I think, Premier are a different level. And then after that, I really do think it soon starts to become, and it might actually be less than that. It's probably like 18 or something. There's the top players.
You mean of both genders, right?
Not both genders, yeah. Yeah, there's probably like 18 maybe like players or something that are just better than most other people in the world at pickleball right now. And after that, I think there's a lot of switching, and we're seeing constant movement also in a lot of those other players as other players get better.
Yeah, and there's always going to be players in Challenger that are, that could have been picked. Like you have Susanna Barr is one of them. Gabe Tardio is another guy who he filled in for Brooklyn the first event, didn't play, like it didn't go great. But I think Gabe Tardio is a guy who clearly should be in Premier. Ben even said it was a mistake to not draft Gabe, which also I think probably that didn't help the whole chemistry situation when he's like, oh, I wish I would have drafted this other guy. So, I don't think that helps.
Well, I think a couple teams are thinking they should have had Gabe, and it's funny because they both involved the Johns brothers. But
by the way, do you see Gabe trash talking Jillian Braverman after she was yelling in his face?
I did. I enjoyed it. It was good that Gabe let her know who the real elf on the court was.
Gabe is maturing right before our eyes. He's now trash talking one of the big trash talkers out there. It's funny.
Also, you shared a photo with me the other day that it really shows where pickleball's come. It was, I think, 2021 U.S. Open.
Yeah, I think it was. I had to figure it out. I had to go look because some guy posted on I was just scrolling through Facebook and a guy had a thread in a thread on Facebook, posted a photo out of a medal stand with Gabe Tardio and CJ Klinger at the I think I had to look it up. I think it was the US Open 2021, and they're children 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, they're like little children. Like they might not be like kids still, but like they're teens growing into adults. And yeah, they look like little kids on the medal stand. Well, I think they were. And it shows where pickleball and how fast it's evolving. Maybe producer Allissa can get a picture of that in here if that's not too much.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll see if I remember to remind producer Allissa to try and do that. It's funny that picture too, because CJ is, I think he's a little bit younger than Gabe, but he's significantly shorter in that picture. And I imagine that he and Gabe are pretty much, they're both grown a bunch, but I think they're probably the same height now, if not CJ being taller. So I just, it's a funny way how quickly the game is changing. Like we're seeing what's going on with that. I don't know. Did you have anything else that big you wanted to touch on before we get into some questions, or, we're coming up on an hour here, but if you had anything else, we haven't talked about nationals at all. I don't know if there's that much to talk about.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how the kind of format plays out with nationals, just with kind of 1 round a day format.
Yeah, I didn't see that many interesting pairings actually overall. It looks like it's going to be pretty chalky. For at least the winners. Anna Bright's playing with Jade Kawamoto. That I don't know what that gives you. It'll be, I think, interesting to see that, but I didn't actually see that much. I'll be curious how that all goes. We have to do a fantasy preview, by the way. I'm going to win this year. We're tied.
Okay, we'll see. Might have to bear down here the last couple weeks.
Your reputation's on the line. There's a lot of trash talk in the last couple years, and I'm tired of it.
You've caught me on a lot of weeks where I've been doing the drafts on like 5 minutes prep, but you know what? We're gonna bear down, get a couple dubs. The Slim Riders can have another successful year. We're good.
I'm not gonna be the cousin Sal to your Bill Simmons on this fantasy draft preview every year.
No, I think you are. I'm confident. A couple weeks of focused Slim will get it done. It's not going to be quite as good on the pocketbooks, but we'll be good.
Okay. Why don't we get into some mailbag questions and then we'll hit girlfriend quarter.
Sounds good.
I also realized I forgot to mention our sponsors. So we'll say that this mailbag segment is sponsored by both our sponsors. We've got One Shot Pickleball for all your pickleball paddles and pickleball athletic apparel needs. OneShotPickleball.com. Get the new Infinity Shot. It's a really good paddle. You can use the code ROSS1010 and get a little discount at checkout. And Drop Shot District Clothing, dropshotdistrict.com, pickleball lifestyle brand. They've got, again, a lot of cool merch. Jared's got his mug there, and just a bunch of cool stuff that you can get online, dropshotdistrict.com. One Shot, NML10, TEN at checkout there for Drop Shot District. Okay, mailbag. I'm not going to go into too many of these, just a few questions here. First question, we touched on this a little bit. Your opinion of many paddles not passing. Was it paddles or flawed testing?
Well, I don't think it's flawed testing. I think it's probably better testing. And I think a big part of it is, and I think you've talked about this before, is basically players and paddle companies, particularly paddle companies, are figuring out what those limits are and they're pushing them. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just thought we should be, like, for people might not know, I don't think this was really out there that much publicly, that like a bunch of paddles, like more, it sounds like more than the last event in Atlanta where paddles were failing left, right, and center. Like apparently companies were having to overnight paddles because all their players' paddles were failing. And you can see who some of the players were. Like Tyson and James were not playing with their normal 002 paddles. They were playing with Power Airs. We had, and so we're hearing that a bunch of paddles, we did hear that Annalise paddles failed. Apparently there's just like the amount of paddles they had just keeping in storage for paddles that weren't passing was immense. We don't have the number, like a number confirmed, but we know that there was an email that went, or a text that went out to players basically saying we are using the same paddle, like the same testing process, nothing's different. And so that's what you're saying, is that like the testing is not different from MLP's side of things. Seems like manufacturers are probably just doing something different.
Yeah, and it's kind of human nature to a bit. Like you're gonna always want to push the limits, and I think players are like, if other people are playing with paddles that are pushing or breaking limit, I want that too. And so we've actually seen a rapid kind of increase, I think, in these paddles that are pushing the boundaries, because paddle companies now know kind of what those are. They're pushing and obviously exceeding them. What's interesting is it seems like there has to be something going on with production of these paddles, where companies are on existing paddles, at least some of them, upping certain specs, because paddles that apparently it's the same testing, but paddles that seem to be passing earlier are now failing.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is that it seems like the same paddles that people were using are failing now. So people are pushing the limits. It sounds like they were only randomly testing 20% of the paddles for surface roughness, like grit, and a bunch of those paddles were failing. We know people are pushing the limit on grit, and they don't still have a good test for that. The deflection testing that they're doing isn't still the proper test either, and they're going to have better testing hopefully by the end of the year. But it's people are pushing limits on things, and and I think most of it is manufacturer, not players, customizing their paddles. But that's not always the case. And I think from a moral standpoint, at least, there is a difference there. But, I think it's the paddles. It's not flawed testing to answer. I didn't write down the names of the people, but it's not, I don't think it's flawed testing at this point. It's the same test. So something different is happening.
For sure.
This one, so MLP views aren't great, but PB fans I know watch when they have time. Is that factored in? I don't really know what the question was, but I actually did want to I took the question because I wanted to talk about the live stream viewers still. I think they didn't hit 5,000, I didn't see, but they were in the 4,000s, which I think our numbers have been a little bit skewed about what is a good live stream number, because the PPA have just started really getting bigger numbers above 5K into even 10 this year. Do you think that's fair, or?
Yeah, I think that's a bit fair. I think on the bigger thing, the numbers are not great for live streamers. And I think why live viewers is an issue is when you look at why sports generally as a product is so attractive for advertisers and television is because it actually draws a live audience. So if you can't draw, and that's good, then you can sell it to advertisers better. So if you can't sell it as a live event, I think it's a big problem. You probably can do something with those views, but it makes it less attractive. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish.
So yeah, I think live viewers does matter. I do think it's interesting in that we are talking generally still of streaming as a different kind of demographic, and I'd be curious if pickleball is on TV regularly, what it does. And I only say that because my parents are funny. Like, they know how to go on computers, they can watch stuff. They never watch pickleball on YouTube. They just don't. But it's on MLP is now showing on the Game Network in Canada, and they watch it and they PVR it and they love it, and they can't wait for the next MLP event so they can watch more pickleball, but they just want it on TV, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think, I'm curious, even just in Canada on that Game Plus network, how many people turn on that pickleball that have no idea what it is, but just see pickleball on the guide, and they just press on it being, what the heck is this? I do think, I was thinking about it again yesterday, that are we not at a problem that these second half, these fall tournaments and things like that as well come on the foot? We've talked about this before, written about it, but they come on the football Sundays. Who of these people, so many people watch football. Are we going to see some change? I know they've got the events are going to be 1 billion days in a row next year, but having the most important matches from September through December on Sunday, you're just asking not to be able to grow your audience, because now I watch pickleball in favor of football, but I think most people are not doing that.
No, we've talked, and I think we've written about it in the past, and I think it's problematic to put yourself against the biggest draw in sports, which is the NFL.
I think another problem this weekend is that with the live stream stuff, one, they didn't have consistent scheduling. I think they were doing that to make sure they got the matches done sooner on the Thursday to Saturday. But then even the Sunday, you have the breakup of, you play the matches, but then you have a break before the final. I don't think that helps things. Like those PPA Sundays, they start out smaller and then they grow. And I think, MLP only has 6 events. People still aren't tuning in. They don't have the subscribers on YouTube the same way. I think it is just a slow burn, and people want it to be this quick burn. It's not a quick burn.
I think that PPA maybe has started to figure out YouTube, but MLP really hasn't. It's you got to kind of win the algorithm as well. And I think in subscriber, I think pickleball actually does well probably for live viewers versus subscriber numbers, but until they kind of grow their actual audience, they're not going to dominate. But we've probably spent enough time on something. Not enough people watch pro pickleball currently for it to actually be getting the level of investment it does.
No doubt. An unbiased inquirer, Jer, wants to know what makes the Kawamotos as good as they are.
I think a lot of it still comes down to their consistency. Like, they make a lot of balls, and that's tough to play against. We can talk about and they're continuing to improve. Like Jackie in particular has very deceptive, I think, dinking and can really set some stuff up with her dinking. Like she moved the ball around, has some good top spin, inside out dinks, like that sort of thing. But to me, number one, they just make a lot of balls.
And I think the other thing on top, there's two things. One, Jackie and Jade have both figured out how to speed the ball up and be more aggressive and initiate offense. I bet if you looked how they played a year and a half ago, it would look very different. And the other thing is, despite, again, neither of them having elite finishing power, that they are walls back there as well. That Anna and Rachel tried to hit through them, and it worked for a little bit, but you can't really hit through them still. And I think not being able to hit through two players who never miss becomes really hard to win matches.
Yeah, they might not have elite power, but they handle elite power extremely well.
Yeah. I just thought this was funny. It's time you admit that Jay is quick and he just poorly plays his chicken wing. He is a natural and elite right side player where he can mask his weakness. So I know we talked about this already. I just thought it was funny. I don't know if did we say, I think we said his countering's not the best. I don't know if it's a matter of him not being quick. I think he doesn't have great natural hand, counter power. He doesn't have a great paddle he plays with either, but.
Yeah, and I think you raised that the other day just when we were chatting. Well, you said Colin Johns had mentioned him as a player who's probably currently not getting the benefit of one of these illegal or at least pushing the limit power paddles. And you do wonder how he would look playing with something like maybe the 002 or something that really, that ball just snapped back on his counters, gave him a little more finishing. Would it help?
Yeah, I think it probably could. I just don't know that Jay, he played, okay, we went 3-0 with James this weekend. I think Jay, I think he has to probably try and find himself as a right side player long term if he can, if he wants more longevity as a higher end player in the sport, find more of that, how he can sort of mask, his countering is not his best skill. And he can be very consistent, right? And he can do some things. I'm not ready to admit that we're wrong on Jay though.
Fair enough.
Okay. This is just the last one because we didn't talk about this. Who did you vote for MVP? Why did Alshon win? We had one of the 3 MVP votes. The kitchen people had one of them, and there was a fan vote. Christian Alshon won the MVP. We did not vote for Christian Alshon.
Yeah, we went Jackie and then Kawamoto, who I thought was DC's most consistent, best player over the weekend. Riley played really well in the finals, but he actually did not have a good group stage. And I think Christian played well. DC's just a solid team. All their players played pretty well this weekend. I think Christian benefited from that outperforming that 4th round draft pick standard. So it kind of depends what your standard is. In my mind, MVP is the most valuable player to a team, and that was Jackie Kawamoto this weekend. I think Christian most surpassed expectations. Probably, and that in my mind is a different thing.
Well, I think we always seem to have a different philosophical approach to the MVP that a lot of people do. I think people just are like, oh, this person played so well, I didn't expect them to play that well. And then they pick that player as oh, that's the MVP.
Well, I think that seems to happen in pickleball. That's why Leigh Whitwell was winning MVPs. But in other sports, that generally isn't the case.
Well, it kind of is the case, or at least people don't want to give it to the most obvious choice every time. Otherwise, LeBron would have 8 MVPs.
Well, yeah, I think that happens a bit, but it usually is when people get tired of giving the same people The MVP, since we haven't had that many MVPs, it's interesting that people are so quick to want to do it in pickleball.
Yeah, because we had Megan Dizon win. I don't know. I think, well, I don't need to make it an argument about other sports, but like when Kawhi Leonard won the finals MVP for the Spurs, right? I don't think that was probably his MVP to win.
Yeah, and that was he shut down LeBron MVP. We're getting off track here, I think.
Yeah.
But I think in our mind, it goes to the most valuable player, and we saw that over the course of the weekend of being Jackie, even if maybe Riley in the final with their most valuable player. We thought earlier in the weekend he didn't play as well. And I think Christian won it because he most surpassed expectations.
Well, and some other people were like, oh, Jade Kawamoto deserves to be MVP. It's like, okay, well, if you just put in Jackie for Jade, I don't think the outcome is that different. And it's like, if you put in someone else for Riley in that final, I think the outcome, like if you put, if you swap Christian and Riley or you put someone else in that role, it's a different outcome, right? That's the difference. It's like, if you put someone else in that role, like, can they fulfill that same role? And I think that's where it's like, are they the most valuable?
For sure.
Okay, so we'll finish off with we got producer Allissa here. I think we've got a girlfriend corner. Allissa, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys? Hi, dear.
Hey, Allissa.
Okay, you figured out what's your girlfriend corner take this week?
I don't have a take. I have a question. So I was looking at the 2024 schedule. Why is it the combined PPA and MLP events? Why are they 9 days?
Well, what was you had some concern about that too, though, didn't you?
Why 9 days? I mean, what are you doing with 9 days? Who's watching pickleball for 9 days straight?
Chair, I don't actually have a good answer for this question. I did think it was a good question, though.
I think it's insane because I was looking at some of the events and maybe us going to some events, and it was like 9-day events, and then there's another event in a different city like 4 days later.
Yeah, I think I think obviously you're not going to get many people going for the whole 9 days. And I think, one 9-day event is fine actually for a live viewer thing. It's almost exciting, but when you're doing it on repeat, it's going to become an issue at some point of kind of burnout.
Well, what about, for both the viewers and the players? Because, I mean, if you play for 9 days and then you get those 4 days off, how much of those 4 days is spent traveling? And then you've also got like your brand deals or whatever else you're doing. And then you've got to play another 4 days if they're not back-to-back 9-day stretches. Like, when do you rest?
No, I think that's a good question.
Well, I don't know what they're doing. Like, you're not going to be in those MLP. I think the MLP, we don't know that much, but the MLP PPA combined weekends, I don't know, is everyone going to be playing those MLPs? Like, is every team going to be playing on a given MLP joint combined PPA weekend?
I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, and they have 34 separate weekends, which is, like, again, we just talk about the saturation of pro pickleball. It is like a lot of pickleball. I think this weekend is the first we have like a joint same city MLP is back to back with PPA. I saw the guys, like, they're playing, like, a bunch of people are playing pro split age today. And, you've played 4 days of pickleball potentially like Riley, and then you're grinding a pro split age draw with Dane Gingrich. And, I don't know what that gets. I think it's a concern that players and teams are going to be, like, players, teams, fans have this much pickleball to sort of, like, keep their eye on.
Well, I mean, other than you two, who's watching 9 days worth of pickleball?
There's people
if you want content, you're getting it. But, like, I don't know if I want 9 days of pickleball on our TV.
I think the people in those you deal with a lot of pickleball on the TV.
I was going to say, I think this might be coming from a personal place of producer Allissa just seeing her TV permanently on with pickleball. So
4 days of MLP on the 4th day, I'm like, okay. But like 9 days, and then I get maybe a 4-day break, and then it's going to be another.
Well, and the one thing I do think about, though, is, like, with other sports leagues, like, you actually have a combined, like, you have content on every day, like basketball, baseball, other than football, like basketball, baseball, hockey. You have content basically every day. Not most people aren't watching they're watching their team, which is I think why MLP, you go to that team model. Maybe you just focus on your team and then you look at those, those other tour events. You kind of do that. I think that's probably the hope. You're not wanting everyone to tune in all the time.
I mean, on the bright side, like for example, how you guys found that like pickleball's on the game network.
Yeah.
I guess if it's on 9 days in a row, you're more likely to find the rando that's channel surfing is going to come across pickleball and watch. So you might get more viewers that way, but you're going to exhaust your existing viewers.
Yeah, I think like we also still don't know. They just didn't give us that much information on the schedule release. So
No.
I think that's just like, I'll be very curious how they deal with this going forward. Cause I think it's a real, like legitimately, like it could be a legitimate problem for them.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong with the schedule, but I believe it was MLP's the first 4 days.
I actually haven't looked at it that close. Is MLP always the first 4 days, or is it just some events?
I don't know. You'll have to check. But for the event I was looking for specifically, it looked like it started on that Saturday. So if that's the case, are you holding like an MLP? I'm looking at the calendar here. But if that's the case, are you holding an MLP final on like a Monday or a Tuesday?
I think that might actually be a good thing that it's not always on a Sunday, but yeah, you might be. We just don't know.
But who's watching pickleball during a work day on a weekday?
Well, they have to put it in the evening if you're doing a final.
I guess. But MLP finals were early, weren't they?
Yeah, on the weekend they're early, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's a TBD on that one.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. We will be back for another episode at some point, probably after Nationals. So we'll have takeaways coming your way, probably similar time this gets posted actually. And then we'll have some other content from Nationals and we'll have fantasy draft preview. So make sure, please subscribe. It helps us get through the algorithm when we started with 0 subscribers. Appreciate everyone listening. You can follow our content at mlpickleball.com. But until next time, we'll see you then.
Take care.